In this problem, we're given two equations, y equals -2 and x equals 3, and we're asked to find the slope and the horizontal and vertical intercepts. To help visualize this, I'm going to graph these two equations to help us find these answers. The first equation, y equals -2, is a horizontal line. It basically says no matter what x value you plug in, you always get y equals -2. Imagine making out a table of values where you randomly pick x values and see what the y value is. The fact that the equation has no x in it, the equation is just y equals -2, indicates that x really doesn't matter. You can put in whatever you want, and y won't depend on x. The y value will always be equal to -2, no matter what your x value is. If you were to plot these points over here, 1, -2, and 2, -2, you'd see that what happens is you get a line that's horizontal, that means it goes left and right, through -2. Let me just draw one. So here's the point 1, -2. Another point would be 2, -2. Another point would be 3, -2. It basically is a line that x can take on anything you want, but the y values are always -2 regardless of what x is. So we have a horizontal line here. First thing I need to find is the slope. The slope would be how far the graph rises compared to how much it runs. Or you can think of it as y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. It doesn't really matter which way you look at it, you're going to get the same answer. So if you like looking at how to move from one point to the next on a graph using rise over run, you'll find that the slope is 0. The rise in the rise over run would be 0. To get from one point to the next, you don't go up or down at all. So your rise in rise over run is always going to be 0. So this would be, the slope would be rise is equal to 0. And the run could be whatever you want. So for example, if I was asking myself how to get from this point here to this point here, I'd say the rise is 0. I don't move up or down at all, but I need to move to the right too. But it doesn't matter what the run is. I'm choosing 2 because 0 divided by anything is 0. So this shows graphically that the slope is 0. If you like the definition of slope where you subtract y values and then x values and divide, you'd get the same thing. Because my y values are always the same, I'm going to have the same number for y2 as I do y1, and whenever you subtract numbers that are the same, you get 0. Anything minus itself is 0. And we're in the same situation, that 0 divided by anything is 0. So either way you do it, you get a slope of 0 up here. So I'm just going to type in here that my slope is 0. M equals 0. In the next question, I'm asked to find the horizontal intercept. Where does this graph over here cross the horizontal axis? Well, this is the horizontal axis up here, and my line's parallel to that, so it's never going to cross. So over here where it says horizontal intercept, I think I'll just type in does not exist. In Math AS, you probably can just write D and E, or you can write does not exist. Again, in Math AS, most problems you just write D and E. In the last question, to find the vertical intercept, we actually have one. This graph actually crosses the vertical axis. This is the vertical axis, and it would cross at -2. But if I had to label the coordinates at that point, it wouldn't just be -2. I have to give the x coordinate. So the point here would be 0 units in the x direction, down 2 in the y direction. So this point here would be 0, -2. So it looks like my answer here is 0, -2, but I would use correct notation and write it this way. The next example is almost the same, except I'm given x equals 3 as an equation instead of y equals -2. Let me kind of clear this out a little bit to give myself some room to write. And I'm going to do the next problem. The equation x equals 3 is going to be a vertical line through 3. It basically says, since there's no y in the equation, that y really doesn't matter. It can take on any value as long as x is 3. So again, imagine just making out a table of values where this time the rule is that your x values have to all be 3, but it doesn't matter what y is. Notice there's no y in the equation. So you'd have the point, say 3, 1, 3, 2, 3, 3, etc., when you move over here and plotted those points, 3, 1 would be, let's see here, here's 3, 1. This point would be 3, 2. This point would be 3, 3. And if you plotted that all day long, you'd see that you're mapping out a graph that's basically up and down, which is vertical. So this is a vertical line. So when I go to find my slope, my rise over run, so I'm going to say m is my slope. If you want to think of it as rise over run, that's fine. Or you can use the arithmetical definition where you subtract y's and x's, whatever your favorite method is. This case, it's going to be that my run is 0, not my rise. So let's just take the two particular points that I happen to plot here. To move from one point to the other, my rise, let's say I'm moving from this one to the one above, I would have to move from this point, I'd have to rise 2 units, positive 2, but my run would be 0. To get from this point to the next, you don't have to move left to right at all, so the run would be 0. In mathematics, there's no sensible way to define dividing by 0. Perhaps I'll make a video on that someday. But right now, just know that mathematicians say that this is undefined, or in Math AS, we'll probably just write D and E short for does not exist. So I'm going to say the slope on this one does not exist. Now, engineers have a different definition for it, but I'm not going to get into that. But for mathematicians, we're going to say that it does not exist. I think that the fact that the graph rises so quickly, some engineers like to call that infinity. But for mathematicians, D and E is the way to write that answer. The horizontal intercept, let's see over here. Does my graph cross the horizontal axis? This is my horizontal axis here, the x-axis. It does cross the horizontal axis, and it crosses at this point right here. If I had to label this point, it would be 3 units in the x direction, 0 units in the y. So the horizontal intercept for this equation is 3, 0. The vertical intercept would be where the graph crosses the vertical axis. But my line is parallel to the vertical axis, so it'll never cross. So the vertical intercept never happens. It does not exist. Ever.